not so important spices, I guess, that were a huge demand by other countries during that time. So I then created my own thesis about the book, where then Istanbul, the thing that I was so interested upon on, is a byproduct of colonization. And the Dutch Indies completely stole the spices, or just the idea or the accreditation that, oh, if we didn't colonize Indonesia, they wouldn't know they have lots of spices. So in this book, I'm actually going to take you guys in how the process of all of this build up to where it stands today, and where the history lies, where it's not being told, and orderly. So I started with keywords about the book. Since I got the history, I got the facts, I basically broke the code of how I'm going to build this book and how I'm going to deliver the message. So I started pinpointing things from the colonization facts, the sambal, and then the politics behind it. And then I started to build question on questions, and I started to get short answers that I could potentially use as a title of the book, which later on led me to use it for introducing other segments of the book. So the keywords that I had were mainly talking about the sambal itself, the chili itself, but it wasn't really calling out the history behind it until I started to discuss with Tracy, I started to discuss with Addis, with Cheryl, and then after a few weeks of choosing this and that and developing that, we came out with a title called Hot Spell, which basically means a short period of hot weather. And it's also a coincidence that Indonesia is also a tropical country, and the thing with Chile is that people know it's hot. So it connects very well to the title that we chose. So let's talk about covers. I did ideation for the book based on solely like the physical look of a chili, because I know I'll be talking a lot of that, and then there's gonna be photos that I'll be treated as if it was a chili where it's hot, it's flaming, but during the weeks I realized that it wasn't really hitting the context that I was delivering and the feel to the cover. So we ended up doing different iterations with colors, and on week 8, that's when we came across one of the experiments that I did to actually work for this book, and it was this one, the heat. And so behind the scenes, I actually explored lots of things about taking pictures with texture from the chili, or even the chili sauce, or even going to a grocery store to actually take pictures. I did get full permission to do it, and also introducing things that I don't think you guys may know. It's on the lower right corner. If you guys know, it's probably a mortar, but the thing to grind stuff on it, it's called a pestle. So the pestle, I think in other countries have like a very pear-shaped pestle, but the ones that we have, it's more like a hammer type of shape, and turns out it's kind of traded that way. And so I did a lot of experiments with that, and all of this was taken with my phone, so I didn't use any professional cameras on it. So moving on back to the cover, I also decided to, constrain the book size that I wanted to make 8 by 10 inches, just because I didn't want it to be big, but it also has to be easy to read for people when maybe they want to just learn about what they're eating. So the idea of heat on this cover really helps me out through the chili seeds on it, and then also the colors that I tried to play with the texture to really just give it a sense that we're reading a book that has to do with chili and a little bit of like the heat of history. So continuing to that, I used the photography that I had and the colors from the resources that I had for the inside covers, front and back. And then this was a week 11 decision that I wanted to put that in. And I'll tell you guys why it became the decision that we wanted to put inside of the cover. But I also wanted to just combine that feel then again about the hot and then the chili. That's very interesting. So moving on to the book contents, I did look up a lot of book design references, but the ones that stood out was a book that was printed in Italy, and then the other book was about Don't Sleep. And it was so different between these books, where the printed in Italy basically just shows you the process of how they print stuff in Italy, and the Don't Sleep book on the right basically showcased things that would not make you sleep when you read about it. So, moving on to the font used throughout the whole book, I decided to use Georgia Pro because it has a feeling of a sans serif that I wanted to use for most of my content that was informal, but it's also flexible enough for me to use for contents that are formal for the book itself. So after I realized the font that I wanted to use and then the layouts that I'm starting to have in my head, I started to draw it out and putting it in, and then that's where I started my first round, which was a completely mess because I didn't have a good reference to deal with. So by this week 4 I started to find new ones, but I gotten a lot of insights from Tracy, Cheryl, and Addis about like how you should design a book, because I feel like I was doing more of a editorial look for a magazine, and I think that was the things that I kept on, the tendencies that I kept on continuing doing. Even till week 4, I realized that my research and development wasn't that sturdy, that it kept on changing, and also learning how to stand with my concepts. And by week 8, I started to get a little bit better at how to maintain like a breathable grid, and I was mostly dealing with a 2-column grid because I wanted to be heavy on visuals too, because that's just the way that I see Samba and I see the history. That's why I wanted to keep that experience that I had to this book. So by week 10, I started to pile up the things that I learned. I started to put that in each of my spreads, which is now working much, much better. And then the colors are more controlled. And with the content layouts, I also wanted to point out the color treatment, because you see a lot of like bright, very vibrant color to it, and it's because I took the colors from the chilies itself. So I took mostly from green chilies and habanero chilies because that's the most common chilies I would see here. And I realized during the time that I was doing the whole process of building this book, there was a shortage for sriracha. So I thought that was a spotlight for me to highlight sambal so that people could get another options besides sriracha. Offense. But I also did try to combine these 2 colors on one of the spreads that are mainly as a page breaker, so they know like the colors when they combine. That's like a signal to move on to the next segment. So for photo treatment of the books, like I mentioned, I did rely on using my own phone to take the texture, the colors, resource for the book, and I dealt a lot of my pictures because it was low res, it was scanned, and the way that I learned how to resolve it is with adding noise treatment, and also fixing low res images on Photoshop really does help. I learned a lot about using AI to help you out. Sometimes they don't really do a good job, so that's like a trial and error that I had to go through to learn. And it worked well throughout the whole spread. It really gives out that texture look to it, just as you would see in a sambal. So, continuing with the history context, the look of the book, and then how I process to build it out, I also think about how to guide the heat of sambal in this book, because we've been talking about history. Now it feels like I'm taking you guys out of the idea of sambal. So I added a dedicated segment on the last signature of the book that talks about how they would have used sambal for their everyday meal, or how they could learn about what they've read and actually like this time understand why people would make this version of it, or even have